Step
Atlas,
right up,
Luna, stop that.
adventurers,
Stop it now.
for a tale that will pull you to the edge of your seat and plunge you into a world where forgotten secrets refuse to stay buried.
What is
Today,
this?
we embark on a thrilling journey alongside a man
Whimpers
who knows the
softly.
sharp sting of both battle and peace. A combat veteran whose quiet life was about to be ripped apart by the insistent barks of his loyal companions. Picture this: the relentless Oregon rain, a ceaseless whisper against the old farmhouse windows, typically a familiar lullaby for Jonas Keene, a soul searching only for solace. At 4:00 am, a time when most of the world still sleeps soundly, Jonas was already wrestling with the lingering tendrils of a nightmare, leaving behind the acrid taste of fear and failure. But on this particular morning, something shifted. It began not with a ghostly whisper, but with the fervent, insistent barks of his highly trained German shepherd, Atlas, and the agitated whines of his spirited husky, Luna. These aren't just any dogs. They are Jonas's constant shadows, his most trusted confidants, his connection to a world he often found too loud, too demanding. They ignored every one of his commands, tearing at the damp earth with their claws beneath the gnarled roots of an ancient oak tree. Jonas, initially dismissive, was forced to pick up a shovel by Atlas's strange persistence and Luna's frantic energy. What he found wasn't a bone or a burrowing animal. It was a thick, rusted iron chain link, buried deep in the earth, as if anchoring a dark secret, a whisper from the past. That chain was only the beginning, an ominous thread pulling him into a web of deceit. It led him to a locked metal box, buried for decades, holding more than just relics. And what was hidden inside would not only shatter the peace Jonas so desperately sought, but would also force him to confront a deadly legacy that the entire town had tried to bury. Join us now, as Jonas and his courageous canine duo delve into the eerie depths of this mystery, unearthing truths that will shock the whole town and challenge everything they thought they knew. This is more than a story. It's an unsolved puzzle waiting for its final piece, and our veteran hero is about to find it. Sleep had been a shallow, restless affair. The image of Atlas and Luna digging with such frantic purpose played on a loop in Jonas Keene's mind, a silent alarm he could not switch off. He woke before the sun, the gray pre-dawn light filtering into his room, finding Atlas and Luna already awake, their intelligent eyes fixed on him from the foot of the bed. The dog's usual morning placidity was gone, replaced by a quiet, expectant energy. After a quick, tasteless breakfast, Jonas pulled on his sturdy work boots. He grabbed a heavy, flat-nosed shovel from the shed, its steel edge worn smooth from years of use. As he stepped outside, the air hung heavy and still. The rain had finally ceased, but the world was saturated, dripping from the eaves of the barn and the needles of the towering pines. A thick mist clung to the ground, muffling all sound and lending an ethereal quality to the morning. Atlas and Luna needed no encouragement. They trotted ahead, their powerful forms cutting through the low-lying fog, leading Jonas directly back to the ancient oak tree. The patch of disturbed earth from the previous day was a dark scar on the green landscape. Atlas sniffed at it once, then sat back on his haunches, whining softly as if to say, "Well, get on with it." Luna, more vocal, let out a series of short, excited barks. Jonas drove the shovel into the soft, damp soil. The work was difficult. The oak's roots, thick as a man's arm, crisscrossed just beneath the surface, forcing him to reposition and dig with care. With each shovelful of dark, loamy earth he tossed aside, a faint, unusual scent began to rise. It wasn't the clean smell of soil or the decay of leaves. It was something else, musty, organic, with a faint metallic undertone. He paused. Looking at the ground, he noticed how the recent, relentless downpour had washed away the topsoil around the tree's base, exposing roots that were usually buried deeper. The erosion had clearly made this area more vulnerable, perhaps allowing a long trapped scent to escape. It was a plausible explanation, he thought. A scent too faint for a human nose, but not for highly trained dogs like Atlas and Luna. After 20 minutes of strenuous digging, the shovel struck something hard, with a jarring clang that vibrated up the wooden handle and into his arms. It wasn't the dull thud of a rock or the splintering sound of a root. It was metal. Atlas shot to his feet, barking once. A sharp, affirmative sound, while Luna pawed excitedly at the dirt. Jonas knelt, using his hands to clear away the loose dirt. His fingers brushed against something cold, rough, and pitted with rust. He uncovered a circular piece of iron. A chain link. He pulled at it. It was unyielding, disappearing deeper into the earth. With renewed determination, he dug around it, following its path. Link after rusted link emerged from the soil, a grotesque metal spine leading him downwards. The chain seemed to be anchored to something larger. He dug wider, deeper, his muscles burning with the effort. Finally, the shovel scraped against a flat metal surface. He worked for another half hour, sweat beading on his brow, despite the cool morning air, until he had cleared enough earth to reveal the object's full shape. It was a military-style footlocker, an old ammunition box made of heavy-gauge steel, painted an olive drab, that was now mostly obscured by rust and caked on mud. The chain he had first found was wrapped around it twice and secured to a heavy, rusted padlock on the front. It had been buried with deliberate intent. Getting it out of the ground was a battle. The box was immensely heavy, and the suction of the wet clay held it fast. Grunting with exertion, Jonas used the shovel as a lever, slowly prying it from its earthen grave. At last, with a great sucking sound, the box came free. He dragged it out of the hole and onto the grass, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Atlas and Luna circled it cautiously, sniffing at the rusted metal, their low whimpers a constant, curious hum. Jonas hauled the heavy container back to his barn, the metal scraping against the gravel path. Inside the cavernous, quiet space, surrounded by the smell of hay and old tools, he laid the box on the concrete floor. The padlock was a solid mass of corrosion, the keyhole completely sealed by decades of rust. There would be no picking this lock. He retrieved a long steel crowbar and a heavy sledgehammer from his workshop. After positioning the crowbar's tip in the padlock's shackle, he brought the hammer down with a powerful, controlled strike. The resulting clang echoed through the barn like a gunshot. It took 3 more strikes, each one sending shivers of impact up his arms, before the rusted metal finally groaned, protested, and then snapped. The chain fell away with a clatter. For a moment, Jonas just stood there, staring at the box. The silence felt heavy, expectant. He wedged the crowbar under the lid, and with all his strength, heaved upwards. The lid, sealed tight by time and pressure, resisted for a second before giving way with a loud, piercing screech of tortured metal. A wave of musty, stale air washed over him, the scent of damp paper, decaying leather, and something else. The faint, sorrowful smell of long-forgotten things. He peered inside. The contents were nestled in the damp, dark interior. On top lay a small, leather-bound journal, its cover warped and stained, the pages swollen with moisture. Beside it, glinting dully in the dim light, was a silver locket on a delicate chain, tarnished almost black, with a noticeable dent in its side. And beneath that, resting on a bed of what looked like rotted cloth, was a heavy, star-shaped badge. He reached in with a hesitant hand, his fingers closing around the badge first. It was heavy, its surface pitted and green with corrosion. He rubbed away the grime with his thumb, revealing the faint stamped words. He could just make out the title Sheriff, and beneath it, a name, Miller. He set the badge aside and picked up the locket. It was surprisingly light. He fumbled with the clasp, which eventually sprang open. Inside were two tiny, faded photographs, but they were too damaged by moisture for him to make out any clear features. Finally, he lifted out the diary. It was fragile, the leather soft and crumbly to the touch. He knew trying to open it now would only destroy it. Jonas sat back on his heels, the three objects laid out on the concrete floor before him. The quiet solitude of his barn had been invaded. This was not a time capsule. This was a grave of secrets, a diary filled with lost words, a locket holding faded faces, and the badge of a lawman, all buried together under a heavy chain. The piece he had come to Pine Ridge to find had just been dug up, replaced by a cold, unsettling mystery that now lay at his feet. The three objects sat on the rough-hewn surface of Jonas Keene's kitchen table. The corroded badge, the dented locket, and the swollen, waterlogged diary. It was the diary that held his attention. It was the heart of the matter, the voice that could give meaning to the other two silent witnesses. But it was too fragile. The pages fused together by decades of dampness. To open it now would be to turn it to pulp. Jonas, drawing on the patience and methodical precision learned in the military, knew he could not rush this. He spent the better part of the morning carefully setting up a makeshift drying station. He placed the diary on a wire rack, positioning a low-wattage desk lamp above it. Its gentle, consistent warmth, just enough to slowly draw out the moisture without making the paper brittle. Every hour, he would return to gently separate a single page, blotting it with absorbent paper before turning it over. It was a painstaking process, a delicate operation that required a surgeon's touch. Atlas and Luna seemed to understand the gravity of the task. Atlas lay on the cool linoleum floor nearby, his head resting on his paws, his amber eyes never straying far from Jonas. Luna, more restless, paced softly, but kept returning to lie near Jonas's feet. They were silent, watchful guardians, to their presence a comforting anchor in the tense quiet of the farmhouse. By late afternoon, the first few pages were dry enough to read. Jonas sat down at the table, the lamplight casting a warm glow on the faded, spidery script. The ink had bled in places, but the words were still legible. The handwriting was neat, almost calligraphic, full of youthful loops and flourishes. The first entry was dated May 12th. Ichen Jobai Bashawu, my dearest diary. It began, he looked at me again today, by the old town square. His smile is like sunshine, and I feel my heart might beat right out of my chest. To think that someone like him, from a family like his, would even notice a girl like me. It feels like a dream. Jonas read on, piecing together the story of a young woman named Abigail Reed. Her voice, full of innocence and hope, emerged from the pages. She wrote of secret meetings in the woods, of stolen kisses by the creek, of a whirlwind romance with a man she never named, but described as the handsome, charming son of the most powerful family in Pine Ridge. As Jonas turned the pages, he could feel the shift. The joyful, looping script grew tighter, more compact. The entries, once filled with breathless excitement, became clouded with worry. October 3rd, 1985. I told him the news today. I thought he would be happy. We could run away, start a life of our own. But his face, it went cold. He spoke of his family's name, of his inheritance, of a future that suddenly had no room for me, or for the new life growing inside me. He told me not to worry, that he would handle it. But the way he said it, it sounded like a threat. Jonas's jaw tightened. He continued reading, the sense of dread growing with each page. Abigail's world was shrinking, her hope turning to fear. Her lover had become a source of terror, his visits infrequent, and his words sharp and cruel. She was isolated, with no one to turn to. Then came the entry that made Jonas's blood run cold. November 18th, 1985. He brought Sheriff Miller to see me today. The sheriff was kind at first. He said he understood my situation, that he would talk to the family. make things right. He promised to help me, but there was something in his eyes, a coldness. He told me to keep quiet, for my own good. He said some secrets are better left buried. The final entry was short. The handwriting, a frantic, jagged scroll. November 21st, 1985. They know I won't stay quiet. He is coming for me tonight. He said we have to talk by the old oak. Sheriff Miller told me to go. He said it was the only way. I am so afraid. If anything happens to me, let the world know I did not go willingly. Jonas pushed the chair back from the table, his breath catching in his throat. The musty smell of the old paper seemed to fill his lungs. Thick and cloying, Abigail's terror, her utter helplessness, reached across the 40-year gap and gripped him with an icy hand. And then it happened. The quiet farmhouse kitchen dissolved around him. He was no longer in Oregon. He was back in the suffocating heat and dust of a forgotten village. The air thick with the smell of smoke and cordite. He saw her face, not Abigail's, but the face of the young girl, no older than 12, with wide, dark eyes filled with a terror that mirrored the words he had just read. She was trapped in a crumbling building, and he had been tasked with getting her out. But he had hesitated a split second, a tactical miscalculation, and the roof had collapsed. He could still hear the sound of it, a deafening roar that had silenced her screams forever. He had failed her. He had seen her fear, her plea for help, and he had failed. Jonas slammed his fist on the table, a strangled cry escaping his lips. Atlas was instantly on his feet, whining and nudging his head insistently against Jonas's hand, pulling him back from the precipice of memory. Luna barked sharply, then licked his hand frantically. Jonas gasped, the kitchen slowly coming back into focus. He was trembling, a cold sweat on his brow. He looked down at the diary, at Abigail's last desperate words. The two images, the two girls, merged into one who had died in the chaos of war, and one who had been silenced in the quiet treachery of her own town. Both were victims, their voices extinguished, their pleas for help unanswered. In that moment, something inside Jonas shifted. The detached curiosity he had felt was burned away, replaced by a white-hot, focused resolve. This was no longer someone else's story. It was his. The guilt he had carried for years, a heavy shroud he could never cast off, now had a purpose. He couldn't save the girl from the rubble, but he could damn well get justice for Abigail Reed. His quest for peace had been a fool's errand, an attempt to hide from a ghost he could not outrun. But this was a mission. It was a chance, however small, at redemption. He would not fail again. He would be the voice for the girl who had been silenced. He picked up the old sheriff's badge, its weight feeling heavier now. Sheriff Miller, he had promised to help her, and he had betrayed her. Jonas's fingers tightened around the cold metal. His personal war had just found its first enemy. The resolution that had settled over Jonas Keene in the dead of night was a cold, hard thing. It was not the heat of anger, but the focused calm of a soldier with a clear objective. The diary was his intelligence, but it was raw and unverified. He knew from his years in the field that a single source, no matter how compelling, was never enough to move forward. He needed corroboration. He needed facts, names, and timelines that existed outside the faded pages of Abigail's journal. He left Atlas and Luna at the farmhouse, with fresh bowls of water and a reassuring scratch behind the ears. The dogs watched him go with an uncharacteristic stillness, as if sensing the shift in his master's mission. The drive into the small town of Pine Ridge was short. It was a place Jonas usually avoided, a tight-knit community where a stranger's presence was noted and discussed over coffee at the local diner. Today, however, he welcomed the anonymity of being just another face, his true purpose hidden behind a stoic mask. The Pine Ridge Public Library was a modest brick building, a relic of a more optimistic era. its windows large and inviting. Jonas pushed open the heavy oak door, a small bell chiming his arrival. The air inside was warm and smelled of old paper, floor polish, and quiet contemplation. Behind a large circulation desk stood a young woman, her attention focused on a book she was meticulously cataloging. This was Jennifer Monroe. She was perhaps in her late 20s, with intelligent, inquisitive brown eyes, framed by a pair of stylish, dark-rimmed glasses. Her brown hair was tied back in a simple but elegant knot, and she wore a soft gray cardigan over a simple blouse. She carried herself with an air of quiet confidence and a deep-seated passion for the world of words and history that surrounded her. When she looked up at Jonas, her expression was welcoming, but also perceptively sharp. She immediately registered him as someone who didn't fit the profile of her usual patrons. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, her voice clear and friendly. "I hope so," Jonas replied, his own voice a low rumble. "I'm researching the history of my property, the old Callaway farm, out on the North Road. I was hoping to look at any town archives you might have, old newspapers, specifically from around 1985. Jennifer's professional curiosity was piqued. "Of course, we have most of the Pine Ridge Chronicle on microfilm. It's a bit cumbersome, but it's all there. The archives are downstairs. Follow me." She led him down a narrow staircase into a cool, dry basement. The room was lined with gray metal shelves, stacked high with bound volumes and cardboard boxes. In the center of the room sat a pair of bulky, beige microfilm readers. For the next hour, Jonas scrolled through reels of film, the ghostly black and white images of a bygone Pine Ridge flashing before his eyes. He scanned articles about town fairs, high school football games, and local politics, but found no mention of any missing persons, no reports of any major crimes. The official record was clean, as if the town had collectively decided to erase any unpleasantness. Jennifer, who had been working at a nearby table, noticed his growing frustration. "Finding what you're looking for." Jonas shook his head, leaning back from the machine and rubbing his tired eyes. "No, nothing. I was told a young woman might have gone missing around that time. Her name was Abigail Reed." The moment he said the name, the atmosphere in the room changed. Jennifer froze, her hands stilling over the documents she was sorting. She looked up at him, her friendly, professional demeanor replaced by an expression of intense, guarded surprise. "Why are you looking for her?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jonas met her gaze, sensing he was at a crossroads. He decided to trust his gut. "I have reason to believe she didn't just run away." Jennifer took a deep breath and pulled up a chair opposite him. "My grandmother was Eleanor Monroe," she said softly. "She and Abigail Reed were best friends. My grandmother passed away 5 years ago, but she never, not for one day of her life, believed that Abby just left. She said Abby was happy. She was in love, but she was also terrified." Jonas listened intently, his posture straightening. "Grandma always said the official story was a lie." Jennifer continued, her eyes shining with a mixture of old sorrow and fresh determination. "She said Abby was involved with someone powerful, someone from a family that ran this town then and still runs it now. When Abby disappeared, my grandmother tried to get the police to investigate properly, but she was shut down. She was told to stop asking questions. It haunted her until the day she died. They were no longer a librarian and a patron. They were two strangers, suddenly bound by a 40-year-old secret. The official records are useless," Jennifer said, her voice firm. "Now, I've looked before. It's like she never existed. But there's something else." She stood and led him to a forgotten corner of the archive, to a set of tall metal shelves, groaning under the weight of massive, leather-bound newspaper volumes. "These are the originals. Before the town started using microfilm, they were donated years ago by the Chronicle's founding family. They're not indexed, and they're incredibly fragile. If anything exists, It'll be in here. For the next 2 hours, they worked in tandem, their shared purpose, creating a silent, efficient rhythm. They carefully turned the massive yellowed pages, the fragile paper threatening to crumble at their touch. The world upstairs ceased to exist. There was only the dust, the silence, and their relentless search. It was Jennifer who found it. Jonas, she breathed, her finger tracing a small column of text on the back page of an issue from late November 1985. He moved to her side, leaning over the volume. The article was small, barely a few paragraphs long, under a mundane headline. Local woman reported missing. It described how Abigail Reed, age 19, had disappeared from her home. But it was the second paragraph that made the hair on Jonas's arms stand on end. While authorities have no official leads, the article read, local speculation has linked Miss Reed to a member of the prominent Hawthorne family, whose eldest son was known to be an acquaintance. Sheriff Miller, heading the investigation, has stated there is no evidence of foul play and believes the young woman likely left town of her own accord. The case is not being treated as suspicious at this time. The Hawthorne family, Sheriff Miller. The names from the diary and the badge were now connected, printed in black and white, on a 40-year-old piece of paper. This was the corroboration he needed. This was the proof that Abigail's story was not a fabrication. Jonas and Jennifer looked at each other over the open volume. They didn't need to speak. They both understood the immense gravity of what they had found. They had given a name to the shadow that had haunted Abigail Reed, a name that still cast a long, dark influence over the entire town of Pine Ridge. The quiet search in the archives was over. A much more dangerous investigation had just begun. The quiet conspiracy between Jonas Keene and Jennifer Monroe deepened. As they left the library, the discovery of the old newspaper article had solidified their suspicions, transforming Abigail's faded words into chilling reality. Jonas felt a grim satisfaction, but it was quickly overshadowed by the cold, tactical clarity of an impending conflict. He knew that the Hawthorne name, mentioned in the same breath as a suppressed investigation, was not merely a historical footnote. It was a declaration of war against a deeply entrenched power. He walked Jennifer to her car, the subtle shift in the town's atmosphere already palpable to his heightened senses. Eyes lingered a moment too long. Conversations hushed as they passed. He knew they were being watched, or rather, the unusual pairing of the reclusive ex-soldier and the meticulous librarian was being noted. In a town like Pine Ridge, such observations were quickly processed and relayed. Back at the farmhouse, Jonas found Atlas and Luna waiting anxiously on the porch. The dogs greeted him with a frantic but silent energy, nudging his hand, sniffing at his clothes, as if searching for any lingering traces of danger. Jonas, with a calm pat, reassured them. It's okay, boys. We just stirred up a hornet's nest. He spent the evening fortifying his defenses, not with sandbags and barbed wire, but with information. He meticulously scanned the property for anything that seemed out of place. He checked the old, barely functioning security cameras he'd set up around his perimeter, cheap, consumer-grade models that offered little more than a fuzzy image, but enough to catch any obvious intruders. His tactical mind, sharpened by years of vigilance, was already mapping out possible threats and vulnerabilities. He knew the Hawthorne family wouldn't operate like common criminals. Their power was more insidious. The next afternoon, the relative calm was shattered by the distinct hum of a powerful engine approaching his property. It was not the familiar rumble of a local pickup truck, but the refined, almost silent glide of an expensive luxury sedan. Jonas, already on alert, watched from the kitchen window as a sleek, dark vehicle, a polished testament to wealth, turned off the main road and slowly made its way up his gravel driveway. Atlas, who had been dozing near the warmth of the wood stove, suddenly sprang to attention. His hackles rose slightly, and a low growl rumbled deep in his chest. Luna, likewise, tensed, letting out a soft, warning bark. They moved to stand protectively in front of Jonas, their intelligent eyes fixed on the approaching car. The car stopped in front of the farmhouse. From the driver's side, a man in a crisp dark suit emerged. He was a broad-shouldered individual, with an air of quiet efficiency, clearly a professional bodyguard. He moved to the rear passenger door and opened it. Out stepped Charles Hawthorne. Charles Hawthorne was a man in his early 70s, but he carried himself with an aristocratic posture that belied his age. His silver hair was impeccably groomed, parted precisely to one side. His face, though marked by the inevitable lines of time, was sharp and intelligent, with a thin-lipped mouth that rarely betrayed emotion. He wore an exquisitely tailored dark suit, the fabric rich and smooth, a stark contrast to Jonas's utilitarian work clothes. His eyes, a pale, almost colorless blue, were unsettlingly piercing, holding a calculating glint that missed nothing. He exuded an aura of old money, inherited power, and unwavering authority. He was the unquestioning patriarch of the Hawthorne family, the silent ruler of Pine Ridge, and the man Jonas now suspected of orchestrating a 40-year cover-up. Charles took a moment to survey Jonas's humble farmhouse, his gaze lingering on the dilapidated barn and the overgrown fields, a subtle expression of disdain on his face. Then, with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, he began to approach. Jonas stepped onto the porch. Atlas, a formidable presence at his side, still growling softly, while Luna stood alert, a low rumble echoing in her chest. "Mr. Keene, I presume." Charles's voice was smooth, cultured, and devoid of any genuine warmth. "Charles Hawthorne, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "You are," Jonas replied, his voice flat. He didn't offer a handshake. Charles's smile remained, though a flicker of annoyance crossed his pale eyes. "A direct man. I see. I appreciate that. I'm simply here to offer a neighborly welcome, and perhaps discuss a business opportunity." "What business opportunity?" Charles gestured vaguely at the surrounding land. "This property, the old Callaway farm. It borders a significant portion of my family's estate. We've always considered it an integral part of the larger landscape. I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer, Mr. Keene. An offer that would far exceed its market value, I assure you. Perhaps twice, even 3 times what you paid for it." Jonas narrowed his eyes. "Why?" "Sentiment, mostly," Charles replied, his smile widening slightly, revealing a flash of expensive dental work. "A desire to consolidate our holdings, to ensure the prosperity of the entire area, and to keep the peace, if you understand my meaning." Jonas understood perfectly. Charles Hawthorne wasn't interested in consolidating land. He was interested in burying secrets. The offer was a test, a sophisticated attempt to buy Jonas's silence. And if that failed, to gauge his resolve. "It's not for sale," Jonas stated, his voice calm but firm. "I like my peace and quiet here." Charles's smile finally faltered. A subtle shift in his demeanor occurred, the veneer of civility thinning. "A shame. I was hoping you would be reasonable. Life in Pine Ridge can be difficult for those who are unwilling to cooperate. Mr. Keene, this is a quiet town. We like to keep it that way. We don't appreciate people stirring up old dust, if you catch my drift." Atlas's low growl intensified, his hackles now fully raised, his teeth bared in a silent snarl, directed squarely at Charles. Luna began to bark, a sharp, agitated sound. The dog's powerful bodies vibrated with a barely suppressed aggression. Charles, for the first time, looked genuinely surprised, perhaps even a little unnerved by the dog's ferocity. He took a subtle step back, his eyes hardening. "Your dogs are ill-mannered," he observed, his voice now colder, sharper. "They're good judges of character," Jonas retorted, his gaze unwavering. Charles's eyes locked onto Jonas's, and the pleasant mask finally dropped, revealing the steel beneath. "Indeed, Well, perhaps you'll reconsider. Mr. Keene. Sometimes, clinging to the past can be detrimental to one's future, especially in a place like Pine Ridge, where certain truths are best left undisturbed. The implied threat hung heavy in the air, clear and unmistakable. Charles Hawthorne turned on his heel, his bodyguard already opening the car door. As the sleek sedan purred away down the gravel driveway, leaving nothing but dust in its wake, Jonas felt a profound shift. The game was now officially on. Charles Hawthorne hadn't just offered to buy his property. He had announced that he knew Jonas had found something, and by refusing, Jonas had just declared himself an enemy of the most powerful man in Pine Ridge. He looked down at Atlas and Luna, who had finally quieted, though their eyes remained watchful. "Looks like we just poked the bear, boys," Jonas murmured, and that bear just growled back. The afternoon call from Charles Hawthorne had shattered the fragile piece of Jonas Keene's life, replacing it with the sharp edge of anticipation. Jonas didn't need a crystal ball to know what would come next. He had seen this escalation before, in different uniforms, different landscapes, but the pattern was always the same: a veiled threat, a refusal, then the quiet, insidious creep of hostile action. He spent the rest of the day in a flurry of purposeful activity. He meticulously cleaned his .45 pistol and his old hunting rifle, checking every moving part, loading fresh magazines. The farmhouse, once a sanctuary, now felt like a perimeter to be secured. He checked his windows, ensuring the old latches held, and reinforced the shed door, where the old metal box was hidden. His training kicked in, an instinctual reversion to combat readiness. Atlas and Luna, sensing the shift in Jonas, remained close, their powerful bodies moving with a low, watchful grace. The dog's occasional soft whines were the only sounds in the tense quiet. Night fell heavy and dark over Pine Ridge. The sky, a thick blanket of cloud that smothered the moon and stars. Jonas sat in his living room, the only light coming from a single low-wattage bulb, casting long, dancing shadows. He held his rifle loosely across his lap, his senses acutely tuned to every creak of the old house, every rustle of the wind in the trees. Atlas lay at his feet, his head resting on his paws, but his ears were constantly swiveling, picking up sounds far beyond human hearing. Luna, curled beside him, occasionally let out a soft growl. The hours dragged on, each minute stretching into an eternity. The rain began again, a soft, rhythmic drumming that added to the oppressive atmosphere. Jonas fought the urge to close his eyes, battling the fatigue that gnawed at his edges. He knew that if they came, it would be under the cloak of darkness and rain, when visibility was poor and sounds were muffled. Just after midnight, Atlas steered. His head snapped up, his body tensing. A low, guttural growl rumbled from deep within his chest, a sound so primal and potent that it sent a shiver down Jonas's spine. Luna immediately responded with a sharp, alarmed bark. It was a warning, sharp and undeniable. Jonas immediately silenced them with a whispered command. "Easy, boys. What is it?" Atlas didn't respond verbally, but his gaze was fixed on the kitchen window, facing the rear of the property. Jonas followed his lead, his eyes straining through the rain-streaked glass, seeing only the shifting shadows of the trees. He heard nothing but the rain, but Atlas and Luna heard without a sound. Jonas slipped into a crouch, his rifle held ready. He moved with the practiced stealth of a predator, making his way to the kitchen. Atlas and Luna, equally silent, were already there, their noses pressed against the crack beneath the window. A low, continuous growl, now escaping Atlas, while Luna let out soft, anxious whimpers. Then Jonas heard it too, a faint, almost imperceptible scrape. Not the wind, not a branch. The sound of something or someone moving purposefully. A moment later, a figure detached itself from the inky blackness outside the kitchen window. It was a man, large and heavily built, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who knew what they were doing. He wore dark clothing and a balaclava that completely obscured his face. He was clearly not an amateur thief. Before Jonas could react, the man produced a pry bar and, with practiced force, inserted it into the old wooden window frame. With a muffled crack, the latch gave way. The window slowly began to slide open. Atlas, with a roar that was half bark, half snarl, launched himself forward. He slammed against the window with unexpected force, his powerful head hitting the glass with a sickening thud. Luna, barking furiously, tried to follow. The man outside, startled, recoiled, dropping his pry bar, but he quickly recovered, pulling a small, glinting object from his belt, a switchblade. The man outside slashed frantically through the open window, the blade whistling through the air. Atlas, snarling, managed to dodge the worst of it, but a sharp yelp escaped him as the blade grazed his flank. A thin line of red appeared on his silver-gray fur. Jonas, seeing Atlas injured, felt a primal rage ignite within him. This wasn't just about Abigail anymore. They had hurt his dog, his partner. He chambered a round in his rifle with a loud click, aiming it directly at the shadowy figure. "Get out," Jonas roared, his voice cold and lethal, echoing through the kitchen. "Get the hell off my property." The man outside hesitated, seeing the rifle barrel pointed directly at him, sensing the absolute intent behind Jonas's voice. He knew he had been made. With a final furious glance, he turned and melted back into the pouring rain and darkness. Jonas waited, rifle still raised, listening intently. He heard the sounds of quick, retreating footsteps, then the faint hum of a vehicle starting up in the distance, quickly fading into the night. They were gone. For now, he lowered his rifle, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the surge of adrenaline and barely contained fury. He immediately knelt beside Atlas. The wound was shallow, a long, thin gash on his left flank. It was bleeding, but not profusely. Atlas whimpered softly, licking the wound, then looked up at Jonas with apologetic eyes. Luna licked at Jonas's face, nudging him to comfort Atlas. "It's okay, boy," Jonas murmured, his voice thick with emotion, as he gently examined the cut. "You saved my ass again." He carefully cleaned the wound with antiseptic and bandaged it, his movements tender. Atlas, though clearly in pain, remained stoic, only a soft whimper escaping him. When Jonas applied pressure, the attack confirmed everything. Charles Hawthorne wasn't just a man with a polite offer. He was a ruthless power broker, capable of orchestrating violence to protect his family's dark secrets. The subtle pressure had failed. The polite warning had been ignored. Now, the gloves were off. Jonas looked around his quiet kitchen, now violated by the attempted intrusion. The peace he had sought here was well and truly shattered. He clutched Atlas's head, burying his face in the dog's thick fur. Luna whined softly, leaning against him. This wasn't a fight he could walk away from anymore. They had hurt his dog. This was personal. His resolve, already strong, hardened into an unyielding, unbreakable steel. He would make Charles Hawthorne pay. The night after the break-in was long and sleepless. Jonas Keene sat in the dark, the weight of his rifle a cold comfort in his hands, while Atlas and Luna lay nearby, the clean white bandage on Atlas's flank, a stark reminder of the battle that had been brought to his doorstep. The physical perimeter had been breached, but Jonas knew that was only the beginning. Charles Hawthorne was a strategist, and his next move would be more subtle, more pervasive. He saw the first signs of it the next morning, when he drove into town to buy supplies and discreetly check on Jennifer. The change was chilling. At the general store, the friendly middle-aged woman behind the counter, who usually offered a warm hello, suddenly became intensely focused on organizing a shelf of canned goods, refusing to meet his eye. Two old-timers, sipping coffee by the window, fell silent as he walked past. Their conversation only resuming in low, suspicious murmurs once he was out of earshot. He was no longer just the quiet recluse. He was a pariah. He found Jennifer in the back room of the library, her face pale and strained. "They're talking," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's all over town that you're an unstable veteran, a dangerous man with a violent past, that you're obsessed, and that you've dragged me into your delusions." Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed her glasses up her nose. "The head of the library board called me this morning. An anonymous complaint was filed. They're concerned about my association with you." Jonas felt a cold fury settle in his gut. This was Hawthorne's doing, a classic psychological warfare tactic. Isolate the target, discredit them, turn the community into a weapon. They weren't just trying to silence him. They were trying to erase his credibility, to paint him as a madman, so that if he did come forward, no one would listen. "He's trying to box us in," Jonas said, his voice low and hard. "Make us radioactive. We're running out of time." "Jennifer, whispers and rumors. We can't fight that. We need something they can't deny. We need proof." Jennifer nodded, her fear eclipsed by a steely resolve. "The diary," she said. Abigail mentioned a place, her secret spot with him, under the weeping willow by the shallow creek. It wasn't the oak